I noticed that the BBC seems to be under the impression that it's got to balance all its reports about trans issues now by calling in transphobic groups like the so-called LGB Alliance to give a counter-argument. I mean, I think this is absurd because you would never do a report on racism, for example, and call in a racist organisation to say that they don't think that black people have a right to equality. What can the BBC do to address this? And do you think it's buckling under a very well-funded, concerted campaign to attack trans people, which seems to have been given undue prominence recently?
I think it's a very good point, and actually a very good example, and something that we've been talking to Stonewall about, actually, about how can the broadcasters, when they do feel they need to bring balance into a debate, do it in an appropriate way rather than in the way that you just described, which can actually be extremely inappropriate. So I don't think that there is a lack of will here by the BBC or others, but I do think that we can do more to basically give people the information they need to be able to make the judgments in some areas which can be quite contentious and where the debate can move quite quickly, but to make sure that they've got that they're doing the right thing.
I remember making a documentary for the BBC about all the areas in which gay people were discriminated by law. It was in the 1990s. I took Edwina Curry to Amsterdam, actually, and got her engaged in the issue. And I remember coming back, and my commissioning editor said that he'd enjoyed the film, but he wanted to know why I didn't have more anti-gay voices in the film. Can you imagine anybody saying that now? They wouldn't, of course. And yet the way that the BBC is behaving with trans people at the moment shows that mindset is still in existence 25, 30 years on, because many of the arguments that are used to attack trans people now are the same arguments that were used to attack gay people in the 1990s.
I can only agree with you, Mr. Nicholson, and I'm just so glad that things have moved on over these last decades, but there is still more we need to do. And I do agree with you. And I think, what we're going to try to do is to engage with Stonewall, who are actually really expert on this and who've raised this actively with us. I've spoken to the chief executive myself, and make sure that we try to make sure that we give the right information to our broadcasters so that they can steer their way through these debates without causing offence and without bringing inappropriate voices to the table on questions like this.
Just on one point that John made to you, in response to the question in terms of the reporting of so-called balance on trans issues on the BBC, you said that could lead to something that was extremely inappropriate. What do you mean by that, and what will you actually do?
So what we have certainly heard from those who are real experts in this field, and I've spoken to the chief executive of Stonewall about it myself, is that, as Mr. Nicholson was saying, there have been some occasions where we've been told, and I haven't seen the programmes myself, where in order to provide balance on trans issues, people who are opposed to the issues in principle are seen as giving balance into that debate. And as Mr. Nicholson says, we would never accept people saying that racism was okay in a debate about race. And I think it's about making sure that we do that balance in an appropriate way, recognising that there are a lot of views around this.
Forgive me for cutting across you, Dame. Forgive me for cutting across you, Dame. What are you actually doing about it, though? I mean, you say you're aware of the issue. You have oversight of the BBC. What are you doing?
Well, so what we are doing is working with Stonewall to make sure that we provide good advice via Stonewall, I think, and others, it's not just Stonewall, on ways to get that debate balanced and rounded in a way that don't fall into the problems of...
Have you spoken to the BBC about it?
I haven't spoken to the BBC about it.
Okay, so you haven't done anything then. All you're doing effectively...
We are taking it forward as a piece of work, following a conversation I had myself a couple of months ago on this very topic.
Right.
Clearly, the whole trans issue and all the arguments surrounding it are extremely sensitive, and the arguments between women who regard themselves as radical feminists and some of the trans activists get very personal and very sensitive. Dame Melanie, you seem to agree with the proposition that anyone who disagrees with any aspect of the current, if you like, orthodox trans rights position is the equivalent of an old-fashioned racist. The most famous person who agrees with that is J.K. Rowling. I find it slightly odd that a broadcasting regulator has effectively said J.K. Rowling and women who think like her are the equivalent of old-fashioned racists. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that mischaracterizes my views considerably, if you don't mind me saying so. What I'm saying is that care needs to be taken not to cause offence. And this is a very sensitive debate, absolutely. And it's one that's changing, I think, all the time as well. And it's very difficult to navigate. And our broadcasters do find it difficult to navigate. And what we need to do, I think, is to provide them with as much information as we can about sensible ways that they can navigate it so that they can bring the range of views to bear, but in a way that doesn't cause offence or needlessly step into a space where they would be making some of the mistakes that you've just described.
But you agreed with every proposition John put to you, and John brought up the thought that this is the equivalent of people who 20 years ago wouldn't, thought there was a balance between gay rights and, if you like, anti-gay rights. He brought that explicit thing to you, and you both talked about racism as well. I would suggest that this issue needs to be dealt with quite a lot more sensitivity. The answer you just given me, it seems perfectly sensible and appropriate, but in all seriousness and in a helpful spirit, I suggest you go back and look at what you agreed to in your earlier evidence, because you, as I say, you did seem to be suggesting that women like J.K. Rowling were just beyond the pale. You couldn't; they're not allowed to enter the debate, and I think that's probably an inappropriate position for a senior regulator.